The subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to the Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee Member Day hearing on legislation to improve tax administration. Today's a unique opportunity for us to hear from colleagues about their legislative ideas and priorities related to reforming the IRS. Tax administration's an issue that I've been familiar with for my entire professional life. As a CPA, I've had many years of experience helping individuals and small businesses navigate the complexities associated with filing their taxes. I know the relationship between the IRS and taxpayers can be strained, particularly as taxpayers strive to understand their tax liability and the IRS struggles to communicate and provide help. I'm looking forward to exploring ways to restore the relationship between taxpayers and the IRS and help the agency better understand and administer the tax code. Over the last year, through more than 10 formal hearings and committee events, this subcommittee has heard from high-level IRS executives, the National Taxpayer Advocate, and agency watchdogs such as GAO and TIGTA on how the IRS is functioning and where they are succeeding and where some assistance may be necessary. We've also heard from practitioners, public interest groups, small businesses, and individuals about the challenges they face with the IRS. One of the challenges I would like to highlight today is this dispute resolution process at the IRS. This is an administrative process where the agency seeks to resolve controversies without litigation. If a taxpayer disagrees with an IRS decision or assessment, Congress determined that a review by an independent IRS employee should be available. Unfortunately, over time, the process set up by the IRS has become less independent and taxpayers are frustrated. Some express frustration at the prospect of not being able to plead their case face-to-face. Others have been completely denied access to independent review. Taxpayers are losing faith that they will receive an independent and fair review of their case. I'm looking forward to working with Ranking Member Lewis to address these concerns and others as we craft a bill to reform the IRS. In addition to hearing from my subcommittee colleagues here behind this dais, I'm eager to hear from other non-subcommittee members who have spent time and energy on bills to improve the way our tax code is administered. Today's hearing will be structured as follows. Members will have 5 minutes to discuss their tax administration legislative priorities. I would remind those members that they are also able to submit written testimony in support of their legislation. I want to thank our witnesses and members of the subcommittee for taking time to be here today. And with that, I would like to yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Lewis, for the purpose of an opening statement.
Madam Chair, thank you for holding this hearing on proposal to improve the administration of our federal tax system. Let me begin by congratulating you on your appointment and welcome you as our new chair. I enjoyed working with our friend and colleague from Florida, and I look forward to working with you. Today, we will hear suggestions from our colleagues on how to improve our IRS operation and taxpayer services. In a nation as great and diverse as ours, taxpayers have unique perspectives and needs. Madam Chair, as you know, we have a voluntary tax system that depends on taxpayers understanding their responsibility and receiving timely answers to their questions. Unfortunately, identity theft and tax fraud continue to challenge the tax administration. It is particularly important that all taxpayers, especially those who are low income, disabled, and senior citizens, receive fair, quality, in-person services. Over the past 8 years, Congress cut the agency budget by almost $1 billion. I said it before, and I will say it again. You cannot squeeze blood from a turnip. We all know that the agency is in desperate need for more funding and staff. For these reasons, we must strengthen the Internal Revenue Service. Madam Chair, I would like to share a brief overview of my bill to improve taxpayer service, H.R. 2171, the Taxpayers Protection Act of 2017. The Democratic members of the subcommittee joined me in introducing this legislation. Our bill will repeal the private debt collection program that costs 3 times more than it collects and abuse thousands of low-income taxpayers by enrolling them in installment agreement that they cannot afford. The program is a shame and a disgrace, and it must end. Our bill will also strengthen low-income taxpayers' clinic, fix the offer in compromise program, and improve overall funding for taxpayer service. Finally, it would ensure that taxpayers know whether the professional preparing their return is licensed and in good standing with the IRS. This bill proposes good, sound policy, and I hope our colleagues on both sides of the aisle will support it. Madam Chair, thank you again, and I ask unanimous consent that my full statement is included in the record, and thank you for holding this hearing. I look forward to the testimony of our colleagues. And I yield back.
Without objection. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Without objection, other members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Now we are going to hear from the members of the subcommittee for their priorities to improve tax administration. And with that, I will recognize Mr. Schweikert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have actually 2 pieces of legislation out there, and here's the basic concept. One is often referred to as a third-party verification, but let's use sort of a simple model example. You qualify for an earned income tax credit, and today we expect the IRS to do an algorithm. We've actually done legislation to delay the payment going out. What would happen if I came to you and said, there's a more elegant way to do that, and the person who's actually played by the rules and has earned that value to come to them could get it almost immediately? The ability to have the tax return and a couple of the key fields bounced against, we'll call them private commercial databases, saying, hey, this database over here says this person had $200,000 worth of consumption, but they're telling us they made $30,000 last year. You know that should probably go into the pile to be looked at again. But if it matches instantly, it's an elegant way to use just a simple high-speed computer match to say, yes, we have good data here, a good request, we don't see fraud, send the person the resources they've earned. It's much more elegant, and I don't mean to hurt anyone's feelings who is a programmer at the IRS, but it's much more elegant than trying to design an algorithm that, as soon as you understand what the algorithm is looking for, you designed what you put in the paperwork to work on to the outskirts of the algorithm to work around it. The data's already out there. It doesn't mean you transfer information to a private vendor. You just look for the match. And so it's a red light, green light. It's simple, it's fast. It would be, I believe, dramatically less expensive. And over time, we need to accept using technology to make the IRS much faster and much more elegant on these. The second one I want to share with you is, how many of you have ever gotten a loan? You've gone out and got an SBA loan or a home mortgage or this and that. You remember filling out the piece of paper saying, IRS, please tell my lender what my last couple of years of tax returns, particularly if you're an independent contractor. Do you know that if I look on here, the technology today is functionally fill out this 4506T form and then fax it. Fax it in. Come on, let's actually sort of reach into this century and just ask for the 4506T, the income verification for our brothers and sisters who are out there getting a loan, that they can use this thing called the internet and technology, fill out the form, turn it in. You know there's plenty of ways to make it much safer than a fax. This legislation, I believe, is Representative McHenry's, so it's already out there. Both of these we already have in bill form, and it's just the embracing of modern technology and this thing called the internet to make it more efficient and more simple for Americans. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schweikert. I will now recognize Ms. Walorski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins, for holding this hearing. It's hard to believe that it was just literally over a month ago that President Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act into law. Yet we have already seen workers getting raises, bonuses, and better benefits, and companies announcing new investments in equipment and facilities right here in the U.S. While this was the most transformative overhaul of the tax code in 32 years, it's easy to overlook the fact that it's been 20 years since Congress took a major look at the structure of the IRS. A lot has changed since then. In 1999, only 23% of individual returns were e-filed. In 2016, that figure was 89%. With the growth in e-filing, fraudsters are unfortunately becoming more and more sophisticated in their techniques. And yet the IRS's IT infrastructure is woefully lacking. They still rely on systems from the Kennedy administration. There's a clear, critical, and urgent need for the IRS to fundamentally overhaul its IT systems, but repeated mistakes, big and small, undermine our trust that they'll get it right. Consider this quote from a September 17th TIGTA report. Quote, the IRS suspended the Enterprise Case Management, or ECM project, due to insufficient funding and staffing. In addition, the IRS determined that the software products selected for ECM cannot support an enterprise-wide deployment. To put it more plainly, the IRS brought the wrong product and then didn't have enough money to buy the right one. I'd be pretty upset if my husband took $20 to get gas for the car, but came back and said, honey, I need another 20 because I got a new ice scraper instead. Also, we need to call a tow truck because I ran out of gas. Unfortunately, this isn't the only failed acquisition. The IRS wasted $12 million on an email system that, as it turned out, could not use. According to TIGTA, again, they bought it, quote, without first determining project infrastructure needs, integration requirements, business requirements, and whether the subscriptions were technologically feasible. But considering the wasted staff time and rebidding the contract, you're actually talking about a mistake that costs well over $12 million. The staff time and taxpayer dollars could have been devoted to other critical IT projects. The IRS is run by human beings, and human beings make mistakes. But when a mistake happens, we need to ensure that there is accountability and that procedures are followed to prevent it from happening again. The IRS would also benefit from a better strategic vision and long-term planning. Back in 2009, the agency embarked on the Return Review Program, or RRP, a new fraud detection program to replace legacy systems. It came in years behind schedule and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. The RRP is a long saga, but I want to highlight one episode in particular. The IRS put the project into a, quote, strategic pause in 2014. They cited many reasons, but here's a sampling. Quote, to determine the priority and direction from IRS senior leadership, to articulate and align RRP's role in the broader business vision, to develop a roadmap for future state capabilities and architecture for RRP, to ensure clear and concise understanding of scope, cost, and schedule with contractors, and finally, budgetary constraints. Looking at this list, I wonder how any project could ever be on time or on budget. I see things like this and I can't help but ask, are these budgetary constraints real? Are they because people spend so much time spinning their wheels without any direction, they just really run out of money? Now, the RRP is more or less up and running, and that's a good thing. It'll help catch fraud. But the process was a failure. Picture a basketball player on a breakaway. He trips on his own shoelaces, but heaves the ball up while falling and makes the basket. You wouldn't say, good job. You'd say, tie your shoelaces. Have the underlying planning issues that led to such a cost overrun and long delay with the RRP been fixed? Are new projects like CADE too needlessly doomed to the same fate? Chairman Jenkins, this is the trust gap. It didn't open up overnight, and it won't be closed overnight either, but we absolutely have to fix it. I believe if we can instill more accountability, better contracting practices, and better strategic planning, the IRS really can get on the right path. Some of this can be legislated, but some involves a cultural shift that's up to our next IRS commissioner, who I hope will make this a priority. Our committee is seeking to closely engage the IRS on multiple fronts to better understand these issues too. Still, I look forward to this committee's continued work in the overhaul on reforming the IRS. I look forward to hearing our colleagues' ideas today, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Bishop, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and would like to let you know that I appreciate the fact that we're holding hearings about the IRS. It's a great opportunity to discuss much-needed steps to improve the service, and I look forward to working with the committee to do so. Over the last year or so, we've had a number of meetings with various officials at the IRS, and I am continually amazed and shocked to hear about its archaic technology and infrastructure, and how much we need to do to ensure that the IRS is pulled into the 21st century. That said, it's imperative that this subcommittee explores ways to improve the IRS's technology and capabilities. Furthermore, when it comes to taxpayers, many of whom still receive paper checks that do not have access to pardon me a second. Pardon me. Let me rewind a little bit here. I want to. We talked about the IRS and its capabilities. I want to begin with my ongoing suggestion that we need to do whatever we can to address refunds. And I want to backtrack because while we get a long way in this discussion about IRS reforms, one of the things that we talk about that we have not talked about, I believe, enough is about the process of distributing refunds. And during the 26 filing season, the IRS issued over 104 million refunds, 19 million of which went out by paper check. When refunds are issued by paper checks, it's important to note that it costs the government about $1 per check, but if processed electronically, it costs mere cents. The potential savings are therefore abundantly clear. Furthermore, when it comes to the taxpayer, many of whom that receive these paper checks don't have access to a bank or a credit union, and as such must resort to payday lenders or other check cashing organization, oftentimes who will charge a substantial fee and nullify the benefits of the refund. By enhancing the electronic payments, there will be fewer costs to the government, and most importantly, taxpayers are able to keep more of their rightfully owed refund. Madam Chairwoman, electronic payments are simply quicker and more secure, and for those reasons, I've been working on legislation to increase the number of tax refunds that are processed electronically, and I hope it can be included in the final package this subcommittee produces. I would like to submit by unanimous consent, if I would, Madam Chairwoman, a statement that I have from the Electronic Transaction Association, which is an association representing over 500 companies that offer electronic transaction processing products and services. They encourage Congress to work with the IRS to implement electronic payments for federal income tax refunds. And that said, Madam Chairwoman, I would ask by unanimous consent that we submit this into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Without objection.
On the topic of security, every day we hear the countless hackers and criminals are developing new schemes to steal taxpayer refunds and are constantly trying to access the IRS's data. In an effort to combat bad actors and collaborate and share best practices to fight off emerging threats, the IRS formed the IRS Security Summit, which is a partnership of the IRS, state revenue agencies, and the private industry. By all accounts, the summit has been beneficial for the parties involved, and I think we should explore more ways as Congress can to further assist this effort. In closing, I wholeheartedly agree with everyone in the room that the IRS is in dire need of reform. We've had plenty of bipartisan agreement on these issues over the last year, and I think there's a real opportunity to improve the IRS for the American taxpayers and start bridging the gap, the trust gap. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to have the discussion today from our colleagues in regards to ways to improve the IRS. And I was listening to my good friend from Indiana, Ms. Orlarski, talking about the status of the computer programming, if you would, in the IRS. And I remember fondly the conversation I had with a prior IRS commissioner about the discussion in regards to Fortran being the computer code that is utilized in some areas of the IRS in regards to its computer programming situation. And for those that may not know what Fortran is, because I look around this room and I see many of folks in this hearing room today that were probably born 20 years after the creation of Fortran, is a 1950s, 60s computer programming system that is so antiquated, my understanding in the conversations with the former IRS commissioner, that it is very difficult to even fix that computer code because no one knows what it is. They've all retired or gone to the great beyond. So this is an area that hopefully with technology, as my good friend from Arizona had mentioned, can be improved upon in regards to providing better services to our constituents and to the American public. But I wanted to focus in particular, Madam Chair, on improvements in the IRS that I truly do believe need to occur in regards to serving populations in rural communities, such as yours in Kansas, Ms. Jenkins. And one of the areas that I see just some simple reforms that maybe the IRS can take heed to is utilizing technology when it comes to callback features, for example. When folks call a service organization today, often they'll hear a recorded message saying, if you would like a callback, we can provide a callback to you at the phone number that you enter into the program. That is a simple relief reform that would go so far to help the needs of taxpayers across the country, especially in rural communities. In our district, we have very limited live centers where folks can go into areas like Jamestown, New York, or Elmira, New York, and meet with an actual person to discuss their sensitive IRS matters. Using these types of phone services that accommodate the interests of our constituents. You know, many are working families, many are working mothers, working fathers that have difficulty trying to travel. Our district, from point to point across the district, is about a 5-hour drive, to be perfectly honest with you. It's very difficult to get to these centers and to have a conversation in regards to the issues before the IRS. So doing things such as that callback feature, I think, is a simple reform that they could implement. I also like the concept that's being discussed in regards to a year-round call center. I know the IRS, from information we have received, has kind of a off-season, on-season type of resource allocation. If we could maybe provide those resources in a year-round basis, many of the issues, especially as we go through tax reform, that many of the taxpayers deal with, can be headed off and have access to information sooner rather than waiting potentially for an on-season staffing level that allows them to talk to real people. And then finally, Madam Chair, you know, I think it would be appropriate on these issues in regards to the IRS that maybe we have a dedicated line to people like yourselves who are CPAs, enrolled agents, and then therefore maybe their more technical advanced questions get the resources immediately responded to by staffing sophistication on the other end of the phone that can address those inquiries, as opposed to folks that may just have some basic questions and information requests that they could potentially get through a direct line. Maybe this would allocate the phone system so that you're not on hold for a significant amount of time. You're actually getting to the resource from the IRS in a timely fashion at the level that maybe your question or inquiry deserves the matching of that resource on the other end of the phone line. So for those simple reforms, I'd advocate for the continuation of this hearing, and appreciate the chairman putting this together and hearing from our colleagues and other ideas to improve services for what we all believe needs to be done in the IRS is better service to the people across America. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mr. LaHood, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Jenkins, for holding this subcommittee hearing today, and to my colleagues for their advocacy and testimony on this important topic. Ensuring an efficient, accountable, and transparent IRS is key to restoring the relationship between taxpayers and the agency, as well as an effective implementation of the tax code. Items of importance include ensuring a service-first agency, instilling confidence that taxpayer information is protected, and upgrading IRS technology for the 21st century, among other things. It's been over 20 years since major reforms were made to the IRS. I appreciate the work this subcommittee has done over the last year, including the Better Way Blueprint. As the newest member of the subcommittee, I look forward to engaging in this important work. First, I would like to mention a bill that I am a co-sponsor of, H.R. 3641, the Free File Permanence Act of 2017. This legislation was introduced by my colleague from Illinois, Chairman of the Health Subcommittee, Peter Roskam. If enacted, this legislation would make permanent the IRS Free File program. I've held a number of information seminars throughout my district on this subject, and people understand how important it is. This program is a public-private partnership between the IRS and tax software companies and state departments of revenue that enables low-income and underserved individuals to choose between the best tax preparation products to prepare and electronically file their federal return for free. This actually saves the federal government money in the process, ensuring taxpayers have access to the tools and resources they need to simplify the tax process. This is important and a major part of H.R. 1, which was just signed into law. Second, I would like to raise a different issue that I am working on to address through my own legislation. Currently, by law, the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service can issue taxpayer assistant order for specific case issues. While authorized by the Commissioner, the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service does not have the same codified authority to issue taxpayer assistance directives for systemic issues. Ensuring that the IRS Commissioner is responsive in a timely and substantive way to both types of requests is important to assure that areas for improvement within the agency are recognized and addressed. In the event that the IRS Commissioner does not respond, it is worth considering what else can be done to ensure that the taxpayer's issue is fully reviewed and acknowledged. I look forward to continuing to find the best way to fix this situation and hope to have bipartisan support on this legislation. With that, Chairwoman Jenkins, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Curbelo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and congratulations on your new role. I'm thrilled that we will be working together under your leadership to reform, modernize, and revamp the IRS, and I know that the members on both sides of the aisle will have plenty to contribute to this process. I want to take the opportunity today to discuss critical legislation I introduced with Representative Danny Davis of Illinois, and which is very fitting given what we're discussing today. Our bill, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Permanence Act of 2017, would permanently authorize the Internal Revenue Service to administer the Volunteer Income Tax Assistant Matching Grant Program. With the VITA program, the federal government partners with the local community to provide free tax preparation services for individuals with an annual income of less than $54,000 and those with limited proficiency in English. The program is specifically targeted to ensure taxpayers have access to services where they can confidently file returns without fear of being scammed by fraudulent preparers. Tax return preparer fraud consistently ranks among the IRS's dirty dozen tax scams, and we know this problem all too well in South Florida. Filing a tax return is enough of a headache without the added fear of being scammed. The VITA program helps insulate the most vulnerable populations from this threat. The legislation also ensures that VITA grant recipients maintain strong records of accuracy that will save taxpayers money. The program already boasts a 94% accuracy rating, even including returns with a complicated earned income tax credit. When taxpayers use VITA services to file their returns, they can rest assured knowing that their returns will be filed accurately and without the threat of fraud. The success of the VITA program is evident in its growth. The number of tax returns prepared by the VITA program was 3.8 million in the 2016 tax filing season, up 100% from the number of returns prepared in the 2014 season. This program is critical to the residents of South Florida that I'm honored to represent, where tax fraud and abuse of low-income filers is rampant, especially among immigrant communities. According to Branches, a participant in the VITA program in Miami-Dade County, approximately 60% of residents qualify for assistance. In 2016, Branches helped residents file 9,845 tax returns at no cost and secure $11.5 million in refunds. I look forward to visiting a VITA center operated by the United Way in South Florida in the very near future. Funding for this essential service has received bipartisan support under both Republican and Democratic administrations. The House and Senate Appropriations Committees have continued to include strong funding for taxpayer services like VITA, regardless of which party is in the majority. The VITA Permanency Act would provide the longevity this program needs because it benefits so many. H.R. 2901 already has the support of 38 bipartisan members, including 13 members of this committee. I urge my colleagues to join us in supporting the VITA program, which has a proven track record of success in assisting the most vulnerable in our communities. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cabello. I'd like to recognize the ranking member for a few statements.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to recognize Mr. LaHood. Did he walk out?
He did.
He did. Well, tell him I just wanted to observe that he's becoming a member of the committee and to welcome him. I enjoyed working with his father over the years when he was a member of the Congress.
Very nice. Thank you. We're now joined by non-subcommittee members who have some legislative ideas. We're going to just move right down the line. We've got the Honorable Representative Smith, Roscom, Renacci, and Rice. And with that, we will yield to the Honorable Representative Smith from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins. It's a great honor to be before your committee. The passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in December created a pro-growth tax code for the American taxpayer. And folks across the nation are starting to see the benefits of the lower rates in their paychecks. Just last week, I visited 3 different employers in southern Missouri who were either handing out bonuses, increasing hourly wages, or strengthening benefits as a result of the new tax code. An important next step following such momentous tax reform is to ensure that the agency tasked with administering the tax code, the IRS, works effectively and efficiently for the American taxpayer. The IRS has been rightfully scrutinized over the years for its mismanagement and abuses of the American taxpayer, targeting long wait times and unauthorized spending, just to name a few. We need an IRS which protects and serves the American taxpayer, not one which proactively seeks to harm them. Simply put, the IRS, in its current form, needs to be ripped out by its roots and turned on its head into an entity which serves the American public, not one which only looks to hinder our families, farmers, and small businesses. In July of last year, I introduced bipartisan legislation with my colleague on the committee, Representative Terry Sewell, called the Preserving Taxpayer Rights Act. This good government legislation would put a stop to an IRS which is inefficient, time-consuming, and expensive for taxpayers. My bill takes the burdens off the back of taxpayers by allowing them to take certain cases to the IRS Office of Appeals, removes threatening tools of the IRS to coerce taxpayers to court, and protects their private and sensitive information by preventing outside groups from participating in audits, codifying into law something the President has instructed Treasury to do. The American taxpayer deserves an IRS that is less burdensome and more transparent. They need an IRS that would work for them, not against them. Madam Chairman, it is my hope that as you and your colleagues on the Oversight Subcommittee consider legislation to overhaul the IRS, that you include the Preserving Taxpayers' Rights Act as a mechanism to make the IRS work better for the American taxpayer. Thank you again for holding this hearing, and I look forward to working with you on this and other issues.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Chairman Roscom, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and Ranking Member Lewis. It's an honor for me to be here today, and I deeply appreciate the work of the subcommittee on which I've served, and I'm here to talk about 2 pieces of legislation for your consideration. The first is H.R. 3641, the Free File Permanence Act, which is a common sense bill that makes the Free File program permanent. It's a program that's a public-private partnership between the IRS and a group of companies which have agreed to offer commercial online tax preparation and electronic filing services to consumers. This partnership allows free tax filing for any taxpayer making less than $66,000, removing a financial burden for taxpayers and ensuring that they're receiving quality guidance on how to file their taxes. As an added bonus, the program actually saves the federal government an estimated $13 million a year because electronic filings are less expensive for the IRS to process than paper versions. H.R. 3641 has 122 co-sponsors, including Chairman Jenkins and Representatives Delbeni, Walorski, Curbelo, Bishop, and LaHood on this subcommittee. Now, the second bill that I want to bring to your attention is one that Ranking Member Lewis is very familiar with because he and I were partners in uncovering this scandal at the IRS. It's H.R. 1843, the Clyde Hirsch Sowers Respect Act. And it was during our time when we were leading the committee together where we uncovered civil asset forfeiture abuse last Congress, and Congressman Crowley is the lead Democrat sponsor on this legislation. Here's what happens in a nutshell. If a person deposits $10,000 or more into a financial institution, that institution is required to submit a currency transaction report to the Treasury Department. Avoiding this reporting requirement by purposefully staying below the $10,000 limit is a federal crime known as structuring. Structuring was made illegal in 1986 to prevent large-scale criminal enterprises, terrorists, money launderers from hiding their money from authorities by consistently depositing just shy of the $10,000 limit. Okay, so far, so good. It makes perfect sense. But when structuring is believed to have occurred, the IRS can use its civil asset forfeiture authority to seize funds in the bank accounts and force the owner of the funds to prove that they were obtained legally. Unfortunately, this very subcommittee uncovered multiple instances where the IRS abused this authority and was stealing legally earned funds solely because the owners ran afoul of structuring laws. In some instances, the rightful owners of the money were told by bank tellers that depositing over $10,000 causes a headache of paperwork for the bank, so they deposited under $10,000 to be considerate of all things. In another instance, a taxpayer deposited under the limit because their insurance policies didn't cover $10,000 in off-premise losses. Finally, some taxpayers deposited under the limit simply because they didn't want their private information sent off to the IRS every time they made a deposit. The Respect Act limits the IRS's civil asset forfeiture authority. It requires that in order to seize funds the IRS believes have been structured to avoid reporting requirements, that the IRS must first show probable cause that those funds are derived from an illegal source or connected to some other criminal activity. Perfect common sense. It also provides important procedural protections, including a post-seizure hearing for people whose assets the IRS has seized within 30 days after the seizure or longer if the asset owner requests an extension. We've just seen too many of these stories about the IRS seizing assets of honest, law-abiding taxpayers, and codifying these protections is something that I think should be included in any tax administration bill. The Respect Act passed the Ways and Means Committee unanimously, which means that everybody supported it except the newly arrived Mr. LaHood from Illinois, and we got him when he voted for it on the House floor. It overwhelmingly passed the House. I urge both of these bills' consideration, and I thank you, Madam Chairman, for the opportunity, and for the Ranking Member, Mr. Lewis, for your work in particular on the Respect Act. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Renacci, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member Lewis. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. I believe that reforming the IRS's ability to administrate our tax code is a critical next step to following the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I'm pleased to discuss two pieces of legislation today that I believe will help the IRS better serve the American people: the Improper Tax Payment Reduction Act of 2017 and the Stolen Identity Refund Fraud Prevention Act of 2017. I'll start with the Improper Tax Payment Reduction Act of 2017. This legislation addresses improper payments under the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is also known as EITC. The EITC incentivizes work while providing a refundable tax credit to qualifying taxpayers. Unfortunately, the program is currently riddled with fraud and error. A 2016 report from the Treasury Inspector General estimated that nearly 1 in 4 payments are improper, exceeding $16 billion annually in improper payments. This is unacceptable. It is our responsibility to ensure that our constituents' hard-earned dollars are being properly spent. My legislation seeks to address this issue in 4 ways. First, It clarifies existing law to prevent overstatement of self-employment income. Next, it encourages information verification when there are reporting discrepancies. Then it allows excess credit payments in instances where it's impossible to resolve reporting discrepancies after verification requests. Finally, it captures information vital to fraud prevention long before paying out on the EITC. This is common sense legislation. It passed out of the House on November 16, 2017, in the first vote by the House on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but it was not ultimately included in the final legislation that came out of conference due to inability to meet the reconciliation rules. I look forward to seeing the Improper Tax Payment Reduction Act of 2017 included within the tax administration legislation we're discussing today. The other piece of legislation I want to discuss is the Stolen Identity Refund Prevention Act of 2017. This bill combats tax-related identity theft while also helping victims. Mr. Lewis was a co-sponsor on this legislation. Not too long ago, I was a victim of identity theft. I leveraged this experience to come up with the safeguards to prevent others from going through what I went through. 5 highlights of the legislation include establishing a centralized point of contact at the IRS for victims of identity theft, making it simpler for victims to resolve identity theft tax cases. Number 2, requiring the IRS to notify taxpayers when the IRS discovers unauthorized use of taxpayers' identification information. 3, requiring the IRS to submit a feasibility study regarding establishment of a program for identity theft-related tax fraud victims to opt out of electronic filing. 4, establishing an information sharing and analysis center to collect, analyze, and share actionable data and information to detect and prevent identity theft. 5, creating a local law enforcement liaison's role within the IRS to coordinate on identity theft cases with local police and law enforcement. Last spring, this bill reported favorably out of the Ways and Means Committee by voice and passed the House on suspension by voice. However, it is yet to move forward in the Senate. As such, I look forward to seeing the Stolen Identity Refund Prevention Act of 2017 included within the tax administration legislation we are discussing today. In conclusion, the IRS needs our help in order to be more efficiently administer the tax code and better serve our constituents. I look forward to, again, advancing these 2 common sense bills and working on additional reforms in collaboration with the IRS. I appreciate the chairwoman, her staff, and my colleagues for working on these important issues with me last year and going forward. I also thank you for allowing me to participate in this hearing today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Rice, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins, Ranking Member Lewis. Thank you for holding this hearing and giving me the opportunity to discuss my legislative proposals to improve the Internal Revenue Service. We need to make the IRS more customer service oriented, an agency that protects taxpayer rights and fairly and efficiently administers our new tax code. The first legislative proposal I have will help achieve the goal of IRS reform is H.R. 3153, the Electronic Signature Standards Act. This bill, which I introduced in the House on behalf of myself and Representative Ron Kind, would provide a simple, no-cost private sector option for small businesses and individual taxpayers to comply with the requirements of our tax system. The bill would require the IRS to issue guidance establishing uniform standards and procedures for the acceptance of electronic signatures on disclosure authorization and power of attorney forms. Currently, the IRS allows for the use of electronic signatures on an ad hoc basis, accepting electronic signatures on certain forms while prohibiting their use on other forms. This lack of uniform treatment adds an extra layer of confusion for practitioners that are trying to help taxpayers navigate our tax system while limiting filing options for taxpayers that increasingly rely on modern-day advancements such as electronic signatures. The IRS has acknowledged that an e-signature option would reduce unnecessary expenses and time spent obtaining physically signed forms. Yet, the IRS has still not issued uniform guidance for the use of these signatures. Put simply, H.R. 3153 would make the IRS move forward with an additional secure filing option that they already support. I would also like to discuss a proposal for legislation that I plan on introducing in the coming weeks that would provide taxpayers with more certainty and peace of mind when they need it most. This legislation would provide for an automatic 30-day reset of any IRS filing deadline that occurs in the wake of a major disaster declaration for events such as hurricanes or wildfires. Under current law, the Secretary of Treasury and the IRS have discretion to extend filing deadlines for certain forms of taxpayers dealing with the effects of major natural disasters. While the IRS often provides filing deadline relief to the affected taxpayers, it usually takes days or even weeks for the IRS to reach that decision, leaving taxpayers in limbo. When Hurricane Matthew devastated my district in October 2016, I had many constituents contact me concerned with how they were going to file their tax forms, more concerned with how they were going to file their tax forms than with dealing their flooded homes and businesses. The past few months serve as a reminder that in times of extreme need that occur in the aftermath of natural disasters, the last thing the American should be worried about is whether the IRS might fine them for missing a filing deadline. Ultimately, this proposal would ensure the IRS works for the American taxpayer when they need it most, the exact type of reform we need as we consider how to bring the agency into the 21st century. I look forward to working with you and this committee to achieve common sense, taxpayer-friendly reform of the IRS. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank all our colleagues that joined us today. We are going to take a recess and go vote, and we will reconvene immediately following the last vote.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One, two. This shouldn't be coming out here. This mixed minus is wrong. Now this one here. One, two, three. It's the same thing. One, two, three, four. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 1, 2. So this one sounds like it's supposed to. It's not coming back out of here. One, two, three, 4. Said this one's bad too. 1, 2. You hear that? It shouldn't even be coming out of here.
What?
You hear that? It's coming out of this one.
Okay.
The subcommittee will come to order. I welcome everyone back to the Ways and Means Oversight Subcommittee Member Day hearing on legislation to improve tax administration. Today's hearing will continue as before, and members will be given 5 minutes to discuss their tax administration legislative priorities. I also remind members that they'll have an ability to submit written testimony in support of their legislation. And I want to thank our witnesses. And this second panel will include Representative Shabbat, Gomert, and Posey. And with that, I would like to yield Representative Shabbat 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Jenkins, Ranking Member Lewis, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on ways to improve tax administration at the IRS. Let me begin by congratulating your subcommittee for its work on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We hear on a daily basis the positive results this law is already generating for hardworking Americans. From the impact on corporations to how the new withholding tables will affect employees, this law is delivering. As chairman of the Committee on Small Business, I want to thank you for keeping small businesses front and center during the debate. Small businesses now have more parity when it comes to the tax code. With monumental tax cuts now in place, Congress must address how the tax code is administered. More specifically, I would like to discuss the treatment of the nation's true job creators, small businesses. 2 out of every 3 new private sector jobs are generated by small businesses. With over 29 million small businesses in the United States, the economy is intricately linked to the health of our smallest firms. Unfortunately, small businesses often face challenges when managing their taxes. While often operating on the margins, small business owners do not have the resources available to hire an army of tax professionals to calculate their taxes. Rather, they sacrifice time away from growing and creating jobs to address IRS matters. For the economy to continue to record impressive marks, Main Street America must be operating at full strength. Moreover, the code has not kept pace with technological advancements that are changing how businesses operate and reach customers. As a result of multiple hearings exploring this topic, I introduced H.R. 3717, the Small Business Owners Tax Simplification Act of 2017, with the aim of modernizing the process for the nation's small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups. H.R. 3717 takes simple, common-sense steps to reform tax administration. For example, H.R. 3717 realigns estimated tax payment deadlines, which cause confusion because they currently do not fall when calendar quarters actually conclude. To bring further clarity, H.R. 3717 aligns the tax filing thresholds of the Form 1099 Miscellaneous and the Form 1099-K. Next, the legislation requires the Secretary of the Treasury to set standards for accepting digital signatures. And when a direct deposit refund is in order, pre-notification testing is also required. To address the pace at which small businesses are pursuing the sharing economy, where they utilize technology and web-based applications to reach customers, we examined the important decisions small businesses make when it comes to independent contractors and worker classifications. Specifically, the legislation allows companies to enter into voluntary withholding agreements and offer voluntary training without impacting classifications. These changes can make a difference. At a hearing that explored this legislation, a witness commented that H.R. 3717, quote, is a necessary first step and would bring about much-needed simplification, unquote. Another witness explained, quote, H.R. 3717 proposes common-sense changes to better meet the needs of the growing number of sharing economy operators and self-employed small business owners, again, close quote. I respectfully ask the committee to take into account these provisions as you address tax administration, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on them. We owe it to the small businesses and entrepreneurs and startups that define our communities and neighborhoods to simplify tax administration. We thank you very much. I think I finished early and yield back, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Posey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
She said you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member.
Do you want to hit your microphone on?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, for holding this today to discuss proposals to reform the U.S. Internal Revenue Service administration of our tax system. As tax day approaches, Americans are being reminded why filing taxes is a dreaded experience, especially in the case of seniors whose retirement finances are simple yet require a very complicated filing process. My bill, H.R. 2721, the Seniors Tax Simplification Act of 2017, would allow for easier tax form completion for senior taxpayers. The IRS currently prohibits individuals over 65 years old from filing the one-page 1040EZ form, even if they have a simple return and choose not to itemize deductions. It really doesn't make sense. Specifically, the EZ form does not include lines for Social Security or other retirement benefits, as well as interest and capital gains on investments. The Seniors Tax Simplification Act of 2017 will direct the Internal Revenue Service to create a new, basic, easy-to-read form called 1040SR for senior taxpayers earning Social Security, retirement benefits, interest, and capital gains, while extending the common sense convenience to the 1040EZ form. The Seniors Tax Simplification Act of 2017 has recently been endorsed by the American Association of Retired Persons and the 60 Plus Association. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to include in the record a January 24th letter of support from AARP and a January 9th letter of support from the 60 Plus Association for the Seniors Tax Simplification Act of 2017. Thank you. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The Seniors Tax Simplification Act is a simple solution, common sense, which would provide a measure of relief for our senior citizens who deserve a tax filing option that is fair and simpler than allowed under current law. I know you all want to do something for our seniors too. I look forward to working with the committee to modernize our tax administration policies. Thank you again, and I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank all our colleagues who came before us today, those on the committee and those off the committee. And with that, I see our final witness, Mr. Gilmert. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
I'll try to be as brief as possible. Just one thing I wanted to bring to your attention today. I know in prior elections, and especially in 2016, the idea was brought forward by a number of candidates that we should do away with the Internal Revenue Service. And some years back, I was having a conversation with a guy I dearly love, brilliant man, Arthur Laffer. Dr. Laffer, of course, was the economic advisor for Ronald Reagan. And we were discussing the IRS and all the power they had, the potential for abuses, and how wonderful it would be if there were not an agency, an entity in our U.S. federal government that had their power. It seems that the IRS is the one agency that can legally just push the Constitution aside and come after folks. You're guilty until proven innocent. You have to pay taxes before you can contest them, even if the IRS is wrong. We have seen people, and there have been testimony I've seen before I ever came to Congress, from people who were targeted by vengeful IRS agents. And I said, look, I would love to get rid of the IRS, Art, but as a former felony judge, I know there are going to be people that will cheat. You're going to have somebody that will check and make sure, keep everybody honest. And I don't know, if you get rid of the IRS, how do we do that? Make sure that people have an incentive to stay honest. And I know in the last election, he talked about a flat tax would enable you to get rid of the IRS. But let's say we keep the current tax system. Dr. Laffer said, the problem with the IRS is they have too much power. They can decide who they're going to audit. They can decide how thoroughly they're going to audit them, if they're going to demand more and more and more, if they're going to just keep pushing the envelope in what you're required to produce. And they can decide once they've audited you how, what they're going to do with the next step. Do they think there was criminal conduct? If so, pursue it as a criminal case. Do they feel they should even take your homestead that virtually nobody else can? They get to decide what happens from there. Do they pursue it as criminal violation and give it to a prosecutor? From a pecuniary standpoint, what do they do? And he said, there's the problem. No one entity should ever have all of that power. And so here, and I appreciate you both being here. I know y'all are busy as can be. And Chair, I appreciate your attentiveness as well as a ranking member, Mr. Lewis. But he said what you do is get rid of the IRS and you create a small agency of CPAs. All they do is audit. And they never, ever get to choose who they audit. Each audit is chosen at random. And so just because you're audited one year doesn't mean you won't randomly come up another year. So they don't get to abuse, they don't get to single people out because of politics or one thing or another. They're handed the name, address of who is to be audited. They do their audit as good CPAs. When they finish the audit, they turn in the results, and that's the end of what they can do. Then you have someone else make decision. Is this criminal? Is this civil? What should be the ramifications? But it takes all of that just arbitrary power, the potential, the temptation to abuse somebody. And I just think that's what we ought to pursue. And I know it's a big step to get rid of a department, but that's really so serious. I would appreciate the committees considering that. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gomert. And again, I want to thank all our committee and non-committee members that came before us today. There were a lot of good legislative solutions proposed, and I look forward to working together to include some of those in a bill to make reforms to the IRS. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be part of the formal hearing record. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank y'all.